My name is Vince Walden. I'm CEO of konaAI. We've got a great presentation discussion that's going to be moderated by Tom Fox, who just came out with a new book, if you haven't heard, Upping Your Game, How Compliance and Risk Management Professionals Move to 2030 and Beyond. So with that, Tom, let me turn it over to you. We'll do quick introductions of this group and go from there. So why don't you start off, Tom, and take us through.
Sure. So my name is Tom Fox. I'm, as Vince said, the author of Upping Your Game, How Compliance and Risk Management Can Move to 2030 and Beyond. I'm the voice of compliance and the founder of the Compliance Podcast Network.
Very
Matt?
good.
Hi, I'm Matt Galvin. I'm formerly the Counsel for Compliance and Data Analytics for the Fraud Section and formerly Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer for AB InBev. Recently, with my partner here, Carl Hahn, co-founded Gentic Global Advisors, and I help clients both find ways to modernize and digitalize their legal and compliance programs, and then we also help manage the risks of technology within companies.
Carl?
Emma?
Yep. Thanks, Matt. And I'm happy to follow on with my partner, Matt Galvin. We founded Gentic Global Advisors about almost a month ago to the day. So it's delightful to join our good friends from konaAI, Hemma, as well as our leader, Tom Fox, on this webinar. I'll just follow on from Matt. I was, until January of this year, the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Northrop Grumman, a very large aerospace and defense firm, 100,000 plus employees, multinational operations. And in that role, ran the gamut of the enterprise-wide compliance program, from risk assessments, data and analytics, training and education, and operational controls and procedures, and was also heavily involved in helping the company establish a leadership position in the governance, the assessment, governance, and mitigation of the risks related to artificial intelligence and emerging technology, risks that need to be effectively managed to capture the tremendous opportunities and capability of that technology. Thanks.
And Hemma, you've had some exciting news as well.
Yeah, lots of exciting things to celebrate. So lovely to be here, gentlemen. Thank you. I am Hemma Lomax. I recently started at Docusign as the head of their global ethics and compliance function. So having a lot of fun there. Previously served in a similar role at Zendesk. I've been at Snapchat and Disney. And before that, I was in the enforcement division at the SEC, prosecuting for about 11 years. That's my US experience. You can probably tell I've got a British past as well, but we'll stick with that. And just very happy to be here talking about these really important topics. Thanks.
And could you give us a teaser on your podcast?
Yes. So Tom and I know each other well because Tom has helped me launch my podcast career, first with Great Women in Compliance. I co-host that with Lisa Fine. It was founded with Tom and Mary Shirley. I also have another podcast called Unless the Podcast. And stay tuned because Tom is my next guest for that one. So.
Very good.
Okay, Vince, could we move forward?
All right, next slide. Why don't you kick us off, Tom? It's all you.
So after the president's announcement of the suspension of FCPA enforcement in early February, Wei Chen wrote a blog post where she challenged compliance officers that now we are at an inflection point and we have to move to a new level. And she literally said, it's time to up your game. I thought a long time about what Wei said, and she is, in my mind, one of the very top commentators in compliance. So I decided to take that challenge up, and that challenge led to the book that Vince mentioned, Upping Your Game. What I wanted to do with the book was take where we are currently with AI, what we have with current compliance, different program features, and how we can use AI literally now to up all of our games. And these are the commentators I interviewed for the book: Andrew McBride, Carl Hahn, Jag Lambda, Eric Seidel, Vince, Matt, and Hemma. And they each had some just incredible phrases that we're going to talk about throughout this podcast. And let me start with Carl, because he has this phrase that if it's not trademarked, it should be, because it's whatever you do, what's the business value? And he's going to talk about that. Vince said it's time to do more with less and drive real business value. Matt, with all of his both private sector and government experience from reactive gatekeeping to proactive risk intelligence. And Hemma had one of the best insights I've ever seen around compliance education, compliance communication, and compliance training. And what's the user experience, what's the employee experience, and what's the customer experience? And she's going to talk about that in a few moments as well. Could we go to the next slide? So embedded compliance, and we have to credit our friend and colleague Andrew McBride for saying this is really the holy grail. But Matt, I really wanted to start with you because you have consistently told us or tried to communicate to move from reactive gatekeeping to proactive risk intelligence. Why do you see that as so important, and how could embedded compliance lead the compliance professional going forward?
Sure. When I take from an experience of evaluating, dozens upon dozens of compliance programs at the department, you see a kind of an evolution of maturity with how kind of different compliance programs embed technology and can embed systems and processes. And historically, compliance was very oriented at kind of process and documentation, and then you put that in place, and then you audit backwards looking. And you might be very antiquated and do it by random sampling. You might have other kind of base level statistical mean, but it tends to be retroactive. And that's kind of the second line and third line kind of often function in those, there's a convergence. As you bring in data, something like a konaAI or other kind of similar type product, in real time, you move that towards that lag between what happened and kind of audit to continuous monitoring. And the closer you get, the faster you can integrate systems and the more enabled your processes. And the more you're using, different technologies like AI to reduce kind of what you're getting to signal that you can operate faster, the less there's a lag between action and risk management. And ultimately that kind of converges, and you theoretically could be in a state of you have things populating, you have AI signaling, and you kind of optimize control functions, and your kind of third and second line converge, and your risk management of different functions can converge. You can work together very quickly. But as that evolves even further, what you should expect is you're not only pulling data very quickly, you're not only triaging it relatively seamlessly, you have human input working very quickly, but then you'll start to see predictive patterns of what's happening. And so rather than wait for things happening in time, the most mature programs, and I think the program of the future, is going to have statistical probability of what's going to happen next. What does the future look like? And that's kind of the trajectory from distant past to current time. And the goal, I think, of all technologies is to go from past continuous monitoring to predictive future. And then you're really truly optimized in terms of resources because you're putting things and intercepting things and putting resources where they count, where others will have the greatest impact based on the best use of information to hand. And that's what I mean by that.
So Matt, you were one of our industry's leaders in this area back at AB InBev. Is this something that you would expect or could see the regulators moving towards suggesting this type of approach as well, or has that already been suggested?
I mean, you certainly see a patchwork, and you certainly see different firms investing in technology where I think even the more advanced functions, it wasn't so matter of a lack of investment or in systems and processes always. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was about being integrated into the system, into the incentive structure, into the workflows, into the business. How much we're using systems to kind of drive transparency, thinking through all the behavioral change that can happen from doing that. Now, where's the market now? What's happening? Well, clearly there's a shift in priorities politically, and clearly there's a question mark around the future of the SCPA. Clearly there's a redirection of a lot of kind of fraud resources towards fraud and fraud against the government. What does that mean for the compliance officer? Well, I think you need to stay relevant to your business. You need to be commercial, and you need to look, and your rank and file. And I talk to a lot of our clients. They're like, we're under pressure from the business. And when I look at what, if we do more towards a recessionary environment, that pressure is only going to increase. because businesses are going to have to make tough decisions over where to cut resources. We've kind of operated under both a good economy and kind of a golden age of compliance for some time. But what does that mean for you? Well, the good news is that a lot of compliance doesn't work. A lot of compliance isn't looking at effectiveness. A lot of compliance is kind of process. And it's a really good time to say, the chance of any sort of deep dive by, or a regulator like the SEC, or certainly, someone like me coming in the short term, particularly for US based companies, is significantly reduced. The teacher's not necessarily checking the homework with the fervency that the teacher was checking it 3, 4 months ago. But you can't message like, we're not going to be compliant, we're not going to do it. But what you can message is, well, there's a huge convergence and huge acceleration of revolutionary technology. Instead of saying, I'm not going to do compliance, or I'm not going to cut compliance, what you can say is, I can reduce what isn't effective kind of pure managers. I can replace it with technology. I can innovate much in the way you're under pressure to innovate in sales, in logistics, supply chain, security. All of these things are innovating very quickly. Compliance should be no different. And now's a good time to say, the better thing to do is to cut the resources that I can't show are effective and add resources and replace them with much more effective resources. Because that change, it's hard to do. Because one of the hardest things for a CISO to do is cut stuff. We don't like it. We like to add process, add documentation, add. Reducing is hard, but now is a good time to reduce. And when I think about what's the next version of a me who's going to come review your compliance programs, they're going to be tech native. They're going to be digitally expected. AI will have been around for a while. Antiquated solutions will not age well in a period of radical change. And so if you want to build, be relevant to your business and build a program that will survive the next round of scrutiny, it takes time to get this stuff in place. So now's the time to cut. Now's the time to innovate. Now's the time to be super efficient and relevant to the business. And I think if you redesign how you think about risk management, there's huge opportunities to bring in something like a konaAI, to bring in something that's going to age well and learn and evolve effectively going forward.
Carl, you recently moved from the corporate world into a different role. How do you see embedded compliance and really the thoughts that Matt had about being at this point where we may need to do things a little bit differently? How are you communicating that to the marketplace?
Yeah, so I think Matt made a great series of points, and I could see Hemma nodding down there too. It'll be great to see her perspective from somebody who's taking on the role inside a complex organization. But from my standpoint, having led the compliance function and the ethics function in Northrop Grumman for many years, is I think it's a time for a pivot. I think Matt talked about a new way of being. But let me just zoom out here and talk a little bit about the role of the compliance officer and the compliance function. And it's been interesting, frankly, Tom, talking to many different companies since I left Northrop Grumman in January. And I still think there's a lot of active conversation going on as to where does a compliance function sit within a company? What is its line of reporting? What is its access to resources and IT tools? And what tables is compliance sitting at? So let me suggest a couple of things for folks on this call to think about. Everybody's going to be in a slightly different place. Some of them may be exactly where I'm going. But I think the future of compliance is you should resist, and I will say that intentionally, you should resist being positioned as a staff overhead function that simply spends money and tells people to do things that they don't really want to do. And to be really practical about it, walking into the C-suite and talking about the latest regulatory burden that's going to cost X amount of money, you literally feel the energy draining out of the room and all the heads going down because people are like, this is just, I get it. I understand. We're a values-based company. We want to do the right thing. We want to protect our shareholders. But where's the upside here? Where's the happy ending for this narrative that you're telling us, compliance team? So I think the pivot here is this process of embedding. And I would suggest that there's some practical things that can be done along those lines. What does that mean? So from my standpoint and my experience, it meant, and you could use the phrase elbow your way to the table or persuade folks that there needs to be an extra seat at the table. when there's the operational team, your global operations council or something effective, something similar to that, where they're talking about organizational operations, organizational IT strategy, AI strategy would be part of that. And you know what? Risk is part of all of that. And what is risk? Risk then folds into compliance, which folds into controls, which folds into training and education. And now you're talking about all those issues in the context of the overall strategy. And the goal is, if you're better at managing risk and all its attendant consequences, then you are going to be ahead on achieving your strategy. And that means better business results. That's the business value. That's what I was talking about with Tom, because now you've pivoted from being an overhead function in the department, and it's unfair, but some people will always think in their head, the department of no to the department of, this is how we're going to get there. This is how we're going to succeed, and how we're going to use tech and other tools just to get better at this whole risk equations, which is so incredibly complex and volatile now. So I would encourage folks to think about who is running operations in your company. What are the authoritative bodies that set direction and policy? How can you participate in those? I would offer another suggestion. If there's a digital transformation team, I got on that too, right? Go talk to the head of digital transformation. It's like, you don't think you need me, but you do. You've got IP issues, you privacy issues, you security issues, and you risk issues. And you're not going to transform truly effectively unless you have people flying along with you in parallel, in tandem, to manage those issues. So I think this, again, like Matt said, is actually an ideal point in time, a unique, maybe an unprecedented point in time, to really jump in and reimagine how you're thinking about roles, responsibilities, and structure.
And Hemma, not only is this a unique point in time, it's a unique point in time where you have started a new job with a company that, frankly, may be one of the most well-known in the legal world, maybe one of the most well-known in the corporate world, at least for those dealing with contracts. The name DocuSign is ubiquitous. So stepping into this role at this point in time, where do you see it?
Well, what a lovely moment in time in history to be stepping into a role like this. And like you said, with a brand that already is trying to improve the customer experience when it comes to legal, unlocking agreements, making of agreements safer. So yeah, I feel very excited about my role, but more excited about what Matt and Carl have been talking about in terms of the inflection point for the compliance function and what we should be doing differently. And so now, with the promise of AI and emerging technology, what should we be doing? I 100% agree with Matt and Carl that we need to be using this moment in time and the opportunities that give us to embed compliance and make risk relevant. I'd also say this is a time to really ask ourselves some tough questions about what is the function of compliance. And along the lines of what they said, I very much see compliance as a service. We need to not think so much about ourselves and navel-gazing about how we can please the regulators or please the audit committee, but really think about the people that we're serving. And that, in my mind, falls into two buckets. Firstly, it falls into the employee bucket, the employee experience. And secondly, the end customer, the customer experience. What do I mean by that? DocuSign's a good example. They really think about a gorgeous UX so that the person using the agreements can make agreements quickly. They can get where they want to go swiftly and safely. And Carl mentioned that in terms of getting people where they want to go. So, we want to make sure that we're adding to the trust in risky business, right? So I like to use that idea of risky business. A lot of what our people want to do, they want to go somewhere that might have some inherent risks. They may know the risks, they may not know the risks, and we want to help them get there swiftly and safely with ease and peace of mind. Now, that's the vision. That's the starting with the future in mind. And now we can unpack, well, how are we going to transform where we are today to bridge that gap? I like to say, how are we as compliance officers going to operationalize our best intentions and leverage the tech to do so? Well, the first is to have the North Star of being useful. I'm going to say decision useful. What we want to do is allow those employees and the customers on their journey to make fully informed, real-time decisions about risk and opportunity. And as Carl rightly said, every opportunity has risk. So it's certainly something you have to think about together. We want to be the office of unlock, not the office of block or no, as Carl said, right? So literally what I want to do in my role is be seen as the person that helps to unlock deals, unlock industries, unlock regions, unlock capacity, unlock, again, safe and swift decision making. So how are we going to be effective at being decision useful? That's the question I have on my mind as I start my new role. There's a couple of things we need to do there. We need to collect, store, analyze information, maybe clean up some of the information we've already collected over time. Then we need to make that information decision useful. right? And if you design for decision usefulness, you might collect different information, you might store it differently, and you might analyze it differently. That's one point. We also are not just in the business of giving out information, we're trying to crowdsource risk intelligence back in. Funnily enough, from whom? The customers and the employees mainly, right? They're the ones on the front lines. They're the risk owners most of the time. They're the ones with their hands on the steering wheel, and they have eyesight that we will never have as compliance functions. And we need to effectively bring that information back in. So I've said, collect, store, analyze, exchange information, give it out and get it back in. What can we do with the technology to make sure that we're doing that? That's my question. I don't have all the answers, but I have a lot of questions. And the good news is there are a lot of exciting initiatives in the minds of these entrepreneurs. So I happen to serve on the advisory board of the Legal Tech Fund. Zach Posner is the co-founder and managing director of the Legal Tech Fund, and he's always saying we need to prioritize a gorgeous user experience. Why is he saying that? Because with AI, coding is not going to be as difficult as it was. So the push now for entrepreneurs is not to be great at coding, it's to be great at user experience. Why? Because we're not going to be able to exchange data if our users aren't, let's say, engaging with our tools. So no matter what resources you've managed to get as a compliance function, no matter what you invest in, if you haven't invested in something where our users, our customers and our employees are engaging with our tools, either to receive information or give it back, we're in trouble, folks. We're in that gap between, purchase of tech, but not using tech. And there's a good article out there recently, I think in Law 360, talking just about this gap. So how do we bridge this gap? Well, I'd like to take my inspiration for things around me. We talked about the journey. When I drive into DC from my home here in the suburbs, I rely on a GPS navigation system to get me to my destination safely and swiftly. I do that for my journey, not for your journey, Tom, not for your journey, Carl, but for mine. So first, we need to make risk relevant to the journey of our customer or our employee, number one. Number two, we need to make it easy to give information that's relevant on that journey. I need to know about the speed limit, the potholes. I need to know about, an obstruction or a blocked road, and an alternative route would be very helpful. It allows me to make decisions. Secondly, Waze allows me to crowdsource back in information. If I'm the first to see an obstruction in the road, I can tell Waze, which is Google. Google will send that back into their data storage. They will analyze it and quickly let the person behind me know there's an obstacle. So, really crowdsourcing intelligence and leveraging AI to bring that back out to the masses that are on the same journey. I use Waze as an example because that's what I'm looking for my customers, for my employees. I want a gorgeous user experience where they will say they won't make that journey without turning on Waze. That's how I am with Waze. It's sticky. I rely on it. Pry it from my dead hands. I'm not driving without it anymore. There are other apps like that, Park Mobile for parking, for example. If you've ever seen those DC parking signs, it's like a long policy book. I give up. I don't try to read them. I use an app, a gorgeous app that tells me where I can park swiftly and safely and get to my destination where I want to go. So I use those analogies just to inspire all of us to think about the end user, think about whether we're being decision useful, consider ourselves as compliance as a service. And that's the way we're going to increase trust in risky business. That's the way we're going to be seen as the office of unlock, not block. And that's the way, to Matt's point, we're going to be embedded in business functions rather than being seen as a separate compliance function on the side. Now, who did I forget about? The regulators, the audit committee, and the C-suite. I have a hunch, I'm going to make a gamble here, that if we do what we've just said, embed compliance, focus on the user and customer experience, those three are going to be very happy. Why? Because now risk is relevant. We've been resourceful. We're not just collecting data and making documentation. We're making sure that every activity that we sign onto is decision useful and not just activity for activity's sake. So I'm really looking for compliance as a service. I'm looking for impact at scale. And that's my call to action to all of my peers in the compliance industry, but also those wonderful engineers that, AI can code for you now, but you really need to focus on getting me to use your stuff.
Wow.
Vince, could we move to the next slide?
We can, but first I have to drop the mic, Hemma, if you can see that. That's me dropping the mic.
That
Well
was great.
said. Yeah, I love that. Well done. And one of the topics, and again, that we explore in the book, kind of following your point to embedding and a continuous monitoring, is the predictive analytics side of the house. When you think about in the ECCP, it talks about what's your measure of precision and recall. What does that even mean? And I would bet, half or more of the folks on this call and listening in have never heard of the word F1 score. What's your F1 score? What's your measure of precision and recall? Guess what? In the next 5 years, you're probably going to know what that is. When you think about predictive modeling and training models, if you have, when you see a risky transaction, when there's a high risk vendor and you can select it, do an investigation or do a review of it and say, yes, indeed, that is a improper payment or risky transaction. When you click that as a high risk, that tells the model, hey, find me more like this. Most of you as a compliance back in your investigation or legal days, if you've done email review, it's the same math, the same concept. When you found that smoking gun email, you said, find me more like this. It was called technology assisted review. It's 20 years ago, right? That same, and I'm not even talking generative AI yet. We'll get to that later. And that's all the buzz. But predictive analytics has been around for years. But to date, in konaAI, for example, we've processed over $1.3 trillion of our customers' data. Some of the largest companies in the world, about more than 24. And that has really driven some great insights into these models. For example, when a payment is urgent, it bypasses due diligence, it's statistically anomalous, hitting on sensitive keywords and typically a round dollar amount, that is oftentimes the profile of an improper payment. But what is it for your company and your industry? All those things will be unique to you, and that's what that model will find out. So predictive analytics is just the start of how we can use AI to really gain insight and capture the knowledge of your investigative or audit or compliance team for future folks coming in. I'll pause there if there's any questions or comments, and then I'll go to the next slide. Any comments? Anything you want to add? No? Okay. Tom, I'll go to the next slide.
Right.
This is one where when I think about third-party risk management and what that process looks like, because I have the luxury of controlling the screen, I'm actually going to go to my website and show you what that looks like, just as a more of a visual diagram. This is on our konaAI on how it works. But if you think about, again, how do we operationalize compliance from a monitoring perspective? Most compliance officers and folks on this call perhaps think of third-party due diligence as the vendor background check. And that is true. The average Fortune 500 company spends $3 to $5 million a year on third-party due diligence. That's a lot of money. But let me ask you on the phone or listening, where does the fraud happen? Does the fraud happen during due diligence, when you do a background check on them, or when you actually exchange money? The fraud happens obviously when you're exchanging money with a third party and doing business. Not to say that due diligence is important, but your job is only halfway done there. And when you think about having a continuous data-driven compliance program, thinking that just due diligence checks is all you need is silly, frankly, and not relevant. And it's an opportunity to change up the game. Perhaps do less. If you've got 10, 15 people sitting in a room doing due diligence checks offshore or in an office somewhere, that is ripe for AI. And actually doing it throughout the process, where here on the left, for example, tying into your financial accounting ERP system data, your SAPs and your Oracles, pulling in your due diligence data. Show me your high risk transactions, your case management, anything that, government entities, your OFAC lists, etc. Give me your previous investigations, your whistleblower hotline. We've got one large company. It's actually one of the largest mineral and mining companies in the world that basically pulls in over 20 different data sources, not just their financial accounting, but 20 different risk indicators to give them the type of robust metrics that they can see. And then there's this idea of objective review. Then we can risk score it. Again, show me a transaction that is urgent, statistically anomalous, hitting on keywords, etc., from a 200,000 invoices to show me the top 10. And it's an objective, repeatable process. That's part one. Part two is, hey, let's make it beautiful. Great EUX. Hemma, that's why I dropped the mic. And I'm constantly talking to my developers. We got to get to things within 3 mouse clicks. And again, we're not there yet. We're still improving. But making that end user experience easy for the, just for the attorney, and the compliance professional, intuitive, easy to use dashboards, that's key. And then as you tag it, the system learns. That's what I mean by kind of a process and a continuous control around third-party risk, whether that's vendor process, which accountants call procure to pay, your distributors or customer process, which is your order to cash cycle, or even your employees, your T&E or your salaries and payroll. This model works for those three entities, your vendors, customers, and employees. I'll take anything that anybody wants to add. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to you, Tom.
I would
Vince?
just jump in, Vince, that the whole user, I mean, and that was a brilliant point made by Hemma, the whole user experience, employee
Yeah.
experience, and customer experience, that is going to come way up the curve. And I know you say we were going to get the LLMs, but having that intuitive, democratized conversational interface with this flow that we're seeing is not going to become a nice to have. It's going to become an expectation when everybody in their own personal lives is just querying a platform and getting all kinds of sophisticated advice and package summaries and briefings in advance. So I think that's the direction we're heading in, and I'm glad to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, no doubt. Anybody else? Otherwise, I'll turn it over to you. Back to you.
I'll just
Tom.
add one thing that
Okay.
I didn't talk about.
Sure.
There's been a lot of focus in legal tech on the admin experience. Also very important, right? The compliance officer needs to be able to navigate this on the back end. But again, if you want to win me over, help me help the person I need to help, right? There's a kind of a chain reaction there. So,
Yeah, it is.
it's not about making life easier for the admin and you've sold it to me. Because again, if I'm not helping my customers and their customers, I'm in trouble.
That's right, Emma. And, in every project that we do, for example, IT, or at least the custodian owners of the data, if I don't have a direct conversation or dialogue with the SAP administrator or the Oracle administrator, this ain't going to work, period, right? And so it's important that we talked about this at the beginning, I think, and Matt and Carl, you did, getting invited to the party. Compliance professionals need to get invited to the party. If there's an ERP system or a digital transformation initiative going on in the company where they're designing the financial accounting system or integrating a new data warehouse, compliance should be should be at those meetings. But you got to have something relevant. You got to have a reason to be there. And Carl, as you described, hey, there's going to be a whole bunch of roadblocks that I can eliminate for you up front, so that they don't bite you down the road. Those are the reasons. I mean, really getting invited to the party, is how I kind of framed it in the past, is so important, especially now in this environment.
Vince, on that theme, there is a question in the Q&A.
Yeah, I was just, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
go
And
ahead,
it's
Emma.
exactly on that theme.
Yeah.
Rajesh M says, how do you overcome resistance from business process owners who are territorial and don't want friction?
That's like the plausible deniability argument, right? I explain that to Matt Galvin. Well, a couple months ago, explain that to Matt Galvin, why we didn't want to do it, because we didn't want you to find anything. What do you guys think in terms of convincing the product owners? And again, you can't be a jerk about it, right? You can't say, I must do it because I am compliance. No, that doesn't work, because you'll have a hint of anger and a residue of anger and that could haunt you later. You got to work with them as a team and show them the value, show them the types of analytics that you can run to bring transparency into the business, not from a fear factor. Going back to like what Wei Chen had said, your compliance program should no longer be based on fear. It should be based on value. Focus on the value. And Carl or Hemma, please add to that.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Vince, I think it should also be based on empathy. I mean, you have to understand what the business problems are with the group that you're trying to work with. And we had great success at AB InBev in integrating systems early on because we brought IT in, and the heads had targets. So part of their compensation been by supporting the kind of underlying compliance platform. They had keys to the sales systems. They had the keys to the digital marketing systems. They had the keys to all the systems I needed to do my kind of privacy compliance infrastructure. By getting on board, I could get a lot of data systems. Then I'm going to component parts of the company. I'm going to the sales team already knowing what their data says, perhaps than they do themselves. Already running items and kind of margins for distribution channels within my company, knowing where they might have weakness, knowing that bottom line might not be as strong as it should be, perhaps for lack of sales optimization, perhaps for compliance reasons. But I would go and have more detailed discussions with stakeholders using the data. And that's the power of that. I mean, then you can kind of bring it to them One of the most, early on in the Brew Right journey, we had compliance committees all throughout the organization, and Africa had its compliance committee. And very quickly, we identified issues across procurement of just subcontracting to get around kind of baseline procurement diligence and credit checks. Kind of a very classic control problem. Having the data on that and having just presented that, not from clients, but from IT to the head of procurement, using a system built by compliance, was a really effective piece of advocacy by compliance where we didn't have to be the bad guy. Merely by presenting data and transparency, you inform a discussion and you get to the better outcome much quicker. So different strategies. But again, as I said, you don't necessarily go in heavy right now, particularly not, read the room in the moment, right? Now's the time we have to figure out how we're going to grow and manage uncertainty. You need to be a partner in generating certainty. And you can do that by having control, having transparency of your data, understanding how and in a way, kind of bringing everyone together to solve a compliance.
Yep.
I piggyback on that, and maybe I can answer John Z's question in a similar vein in the chat. So exactly what Matt said, again, our best intentions are always to partner with our cross-functional units to do this, but how do we operationalize that? I think about this a lot, right? Just one layer down, what can we actually do to make that seamless and less friction? I mentioned being the Office of Unlock earlier, but I'll be honest, it's not about me or compliance. It's about all of these functions being the Office of Unlock together. It's a movement, right? It's a motion that we should all be doing together in service of the business. And so the shared language alone, just the branding, we're all the Office of Unlock together. What we're doing here is unlocking a deal. It focuses the mind of an otherwise disparate group of functions with different priorities, different objectives and key results. Actually, if we all come together to unlock a deal, an industry, a market, we can operate differently. And so to John's question, he's a UX professional. He's asking about carrying the torch and, understanding the things he needs to do his job, legal and compliance. Again, oh no, before I can do my job, Hemma, I need to deal with your people to find out whether I've hit on privacy. He's not wrong. But again, there's a purpose behind that. That question that John's asking legal is just to get one notch further to being the Office of Unlock and helping our people get where they want to go. So I'm not saying that's the panacea, but in terms of strategies, that's one thing I'm experimenting with, is not calling compliance the Office of Unlock, calling all of us the Office of Unlock, right? And all of us focusing our mind on helping people get where they want to go. This is where you make everything relevant: risk, UX, IT, ER, HR. We're all in service of unlocking markets.
And
Very good.
I would jump in. I mean, this is such an important issue, right? Change management and organizational transformation. It's as important as the tech. It may be more important than the tech, frankly. It's the ball game. So Coalition for Change, expressing the empathy that Hemma and Matt both expressed. I will go to the third category, which is when none of that works and you still have resistance and saboteurs and fiefdoms and folks that just aren't teaming. And this does happen in complex organizations. You need that top covered, you need that strong leadership from the top, and you need to get out with at least one consultant that's called the power tools, because you really got to get in there and you got to make this stuff stick. Whereas, teaming is a value number one. It's how you're going to be evaluated. It's what success looks like, and behaviors that cut against that you want to disincentivize that. And that is the harder piece. And that's what I see missing in some of these projects. So you get these outliers and you get the less than full implementation. And you actually, in some cases, get actions that actually undermine the ultimate goal. And that's why our business world is littered with lots of failed IT projects. So let's avoid that.
Yeah, no doubt.
Vince, could we move to the next slide? And Carl, I want to maybe ask you to lead off this with, once again, your trademarked phrase. And once again, if it's not trademarked, you should. What's the business value? Because what I want to really explore with you is, and you touched on that a little, how can we move from continuous monitoring for compliance to continuous monitoring embedded in the business operations, giving the businesses the information they need to make a business decision or a business judgment and move forward with a business transaction, literally at the speed of AI with the tools of tech tools and AI and compliance?
Yeah, so this is going to be a really evolving area, and quickly. And for organizations generally, right, whether it's your CIO's office or your digital transformation teams, and the compliance issues come into that, and there's a compliance aspect to it. So my assumption that this is a sophisticated audience, I can see it in the questions already. So you're not unaware of the obvious fact that when you're using AI, when you're using algorithms training on data sets, that the behaviors and the outputs of the AI will change over time as the feedback loops goes into the math, as the math continues to change. And I mean, and frankly, we've seen examples of where the AI is working as a responsible adult on Monday. It's an irresponsible teenager by Friday, and you got completely taken by surprise, right? So continuous monitoring and supervision is going to be a fundamental function of a strong governance process. The governance process cannot be static. You can't say, look, I got this use case, I approved this model, I mitigated these consequences, I rolled out some training, and now I'm done. I move on to the next use case. You got to go back. And in fact, when we were looking at pilot programs, Tom, at Northrop, we would say, you teams, you got to give us the report card. What is happening with this bot? What actually happened out there in the wild? What kind of outputs did we get? What kind of adverse consequences? What kind of mistakes were made? What's the feedback loop? And you have to do that. Now, that's somewhat anecdotal, and it is somewhat episodic. That's hard. And it's a bit human, and it's very focused on human resources, which is also hard. I think what needs to happen here, and people are actively talking about this, right, in the professional community and the research community, is how do you bring in test and evaluation? Think about, I came from a company that makes advanced aircraft, right? You have a lot of test and evaluation and quality control processes on those airplanes before they go into air, or on anything, frankly, that goes into space where you can't get it back. What does that look like in an AI world? How is it that we are continuously monitoring the performance of models, the feedback loops on models, the adjustments of their performance, and the quality of those outputs? And that's critical, because you're going to have outputs that your employees are relying on. And I think, as you pointed out, Hannah, especially given your business, your outputs are relied upon by customers. And they're not only just relied upon by customers, they're actually used to create legally binding documents, which then become litigated. So that's a really kind of high stakes output. So it better be right. And it better be tested and evaluated and accurate. Since I'm talking to a group of talented professionals, I think there needs to be more collective action here amongst industry to set standards, to talk with some common protocols. I would not look for a regulation or strong sort of legislation on this, particularly in the US right now. You may get something out of Europe on conformity testing, but I actually think this back end of testing, evaluation, and monitoring is a tremendously important component of AI governance and risk, and taking advantage of AI opportunity while managing risk. But I have to say, we have work to do. And that's part of the work that Matt and I want to work on in conjunction with companies like Vince and others.
Matt, we haven't heard from you for a few moments. What do you see in terms of moving the compliance function into the business operations so that you can truly have that seamless experience at the business level?
I think there's what we're seeing and then what we're kind of expecting to see. I think as businesses radically adopt generative AI, a lot of connections I think people are going to have are going to be filtered through some sort of generative AI copilot. And you're going to ask, the generative AI copilot, based upon available data, what are sales projections? You're going to ask, what's the marketing? What are the kind of biometrics of the, and information is going to be on demand. That's going to create different opportunities for compliance to embed themselves with the kind of workplace copilot or the workplace generative AI bot. You see, we're kind of at a weird adolescence now where you kind of think of like policies. And a lot of policies now, it's you or your outside counsel is probably using a generated by you generate a policy. You might touch it up, put it in place, but then you're going to have some sort of chatbot that's going to filter it and translate it for people, which is funny, right? Because you have like a bot creating a policy to a human, it's putting them in a bot's translating that policy to a human. And there's kind of weird inefficiencies in this adolescence that we're growing up in. I think what we're going to see is a convergence of that and a need, okay, very creatively, what is a business record? What is a business communication? How is compliance interposed in that? Are people asking two different questions about what is the commercial kind of question and what is the compliance advice? Or is that merging? How does privilege advice work in that? How do investments work in that? What sort of sources do I have, given that kind of real-time feed to monitor risk more broadly? I think all of this is going to be revisited in the next couple of years. And it's a really, truly exciting time to be in compliance because I think you'll see a lot of what we're doing is obsolete really quickly. But that doesn't mean you need huge budgets because you just need to figure out how to work with the business to capture what they're doing quickly. And that's what I think your compliance program in the future like.
Vince, could we go to the next slide?
Sure.
So, Hemma, this is really one I wanted to at least start with you on because you've been so passionate in this webinar even about the experiences of the ultimate audience. And you've listed multiple audiences. You've listed employees. You have listed customers. You have listed third parties who may be consultants or suppliers to your organization. You've even listed the board of directors, potentially regulators, senior management. So what I really wanted to maybe explore with you is in terms of compliance communication, which I'm going to have both training, communications, and other, why is customization for all of those audiences so important?
Well, it goes back to compliance as a service, doesn't it? It goes back to who you're serving and having empathy for your end user and making it decision useful. And I think I'm gonna use another framing. We don't want knowledge management. We want wisdom, right? It's not about knowledge anymore. Knowledge is ubiquitous. It's all over the place. Back to let's belabor the driving analogy. I am not forced to read the highway code once a year as a driver. I don't have to take any classes, any click-throughs. There are other forces in play that have helped me be a good, safe driver getting on my way as a driver. And it's the same kind of thing. We need to really, blow it up a little bit, Tom. I know there's customization. I know there's test out. I know there's some really good things that are being done in the training and communications place. There's great vendors. But what if we just step back a little bit and thought about what we're trying to do here? We're trying to help people get on their way swiftly and safely without burdening them. Let's start with policies. I know that's not what this question is about, but I often tell the tale of when I was driving around in London. You guys over here, I think, use MapQuest, but we used to have these big, thick volumes of an A to Z, and A to Z, and we would put them on our steering wheels, and that's how we would get around London. And the policy book and the training package, and even sometimes the newsletters and the comms remind me of that thick A to Z, that thick A to Z, where, the only people that knew it, funnily enough, were the people that drove around London all the time, the black cab taxi drivers. And they had to study for years to know what they needed to know to do that. So, we've come a long way from my paper A to Z. I want us to be thinking the same when it comes to compliance education and communication. So customization is key for sure. Customize it not to just my preferences. We know, from learning and education, there's different user preferences when it comes to education and learning. How about customize it to my behaviors and my habits? Right? That's better. That's easier. Make it easy for me to adopt. Make it sticky so that when I need to get the information, I know where to go. And when I don't know what I don't know, someone's there guiding me. Another framing I like to use is we don't want to be the hero in anyone else's story, right? It's very easy for a compliance function to think of themselves as the hero. If we're the hero, who's the villain, right? Unfortunately, we sometimes position our employees and our customers as the insider threat or the people that don't know the risk. And gosh, if only they had me on their shoulder, they would be okay. Well, we've got to rethink that as well. That's another framing we need to rethink. We don't want to be the hero in the journey of our employees and our business. We want to be the guide. Let them be the hero in their own story and guide them. So compliance education and communication needs to be in service as a guide. It needs to be contextual, to your point. It needs to be real time and relevant. So when it comes to customization, what I've seen is we customize it for sales versus engineering or for customer facing versus non-customer facing. I would like to see us go further. Let's customize it for humans, the humans that we serve. Let's customize it for people that, they consume 144 characters, right? Not an hour or 2 hours of click through. We're stuck a little bit. I'll give you an example. California, I think at the time of this webinar, still requires 2 full hours of prevention of harassment training. Okay, gives you some leeway on what you do there, but it requires it. I hate to be flippant. I'm like, get out and vote, California, because we need some leeway there. We can't be forcing humans to carry on doing 2 hours when it feels irrelevant and friction, and it really makes us, you know, it really ruins the trust that we're building in all these other wonderful ways. So I'll pause there. I agree with what's on the slide, but I would say let's think bigger. Oh, you're on mute, Tom.
Tom, you're mute.
Yeah, so I mean, Hannah, that was a great overview. I think that in animating principles, I think I've always, as a chief compliance officer, really felt customization was critical, and the vision was to be able to take, you know, Charlie, who had a role doing X, Y, Z, being pushed, proactively pushed, micro learnings and other modules that spoke to their role, what they needed to know, what mattered to them, using the language that they use in their job. And that's going to make a difference, right? But, you know, frankly, social media has gotten super good at doing just that, and compliance for some reason just doesn't. And it's like, well, no, you have to go out and you have to find this class and you have to register, you have to sign up for it, and you get on. And frankly, sometimes it's going to be a narrated PowerPoint set of decks that in a robotic voice that takes an hour to complete, that everybody's trying to click through as fast as possible. That's still too much out there. I think, and I know we're running out of time, and Tom's got a final question. What I want to add to your comments is we can really use tech to revolutionize this space, right? The LLMs, you know, having, you know, I'd love to test LLMs at the company. You know, tell me about our gift and gratuity process. I want to go to a foreign country. I want to take my laptop with me. Can I do that? Ask a bad question, still get a good answer, still go to the right place. You know, I've seen this point you to a micro learning, you know, being much more interactive, being much more proactive and intuitive in how training and education is being delivered. But also on the flip side, we're going to be able to develop training and education on the fly using video to, you know, text to video and many tools where you are being the producer, the developer, and the distributor of education on a much faster turn. And I think that's going to lead to this user experience you talk about, which is people are actually pay attention and they're going to be like, oh yeah, I heard about that. Now I know what to do. Now I know where to go for help.
That ties right into the bot conversation, huh, Tom?
Yeah, Vince, actually, we've got less than 10 minutes left. I wanted to go through a final question with everyone. So with that, and I know Hemma's got a hard stop, so I wanted to start with Hemma, and this is a question everyone's going to get, including you, Vince. What can a CCO do now to up their game? So Hemma?
There's a lot you can do. I would start with being really excited about knowing what you don't know, and buy Tom's book, Upping Your Game, because I learned a ton about the use cases that are out there. There's some comfort, isn't there, in learning what other people are doing and realizing that it's out there and you're not the first. So take a look at the book, because there are great examples of not this year's use cases. You know, people have been using this technology for a while to great impact and great effect. And be curious about that. Carl mentioned this idea of, you know, learning for each other, this industry peer benchmarking. Tom's book helps you with that. Hopefully it will inspire you to go do more of your own. Make friends across the industry. You are not alone in compliance, even though it sometimes feels that way. So I would say make friends and be curious, because opportunity is out there.
Matt?
Yeah, part of the reason why we founded our group was to out of empathy for kind of CISOs and general counsel to kind of create a modern compliance program. You need first-rate advisory, you need investigative capability, and you have to quickly understand what systems and processes and technologies are worth your time. I understand very well, time is finite. I used to spend a ton of time as a CISO going to India and Israel to find emerging tech and figure out how to bring it in. That's why we built a portal of technology. You can see a marketplace of 3,000 for legal vendors, with the best ones getting accredited in that. So you can kind of make rapid selection, what's going to work, what claims are true, and how to get it in. But more to the point, I think you need to really think, how can I do it differently? What's not working for me? And if there's anything in your program right now that you don't understand how to measure the effectiveness of, it might be because it's not effective. And let's think about what to do and how to optimize now.
Carl?
Yeah, so I was trying to think of something new to answer this question, but the idea popped in my head, and I think you should treat every day as if it's the first day on your job, right? Because what do I mean by that? Look around you, constantly rebuild and refresh your internal network. That's how you get those seats at the table. That's how you demonstrate that business value. That's how you show that empathy. That's how you're unlocking, not locking, as Emma said. And you know what? I think it's easy after you've been enrolled for a while to say, "Oh, I've got that done. I know everybody." Actually, you don't. There's lots of people. I mean, if any big company these days, take a step back. You probably have a high percentage of brand new employees, brand new managers, brand new leaders. They don't know you. They may not even know what the company stands for. They may not know exactly what they're supposed to do. So you have to be advocating all the time. Every day is day one. Every day is rebuild your network. Every day is go out there and prove that you are that trusted advisor. And that will give you a lot of credibility to launch the programs in the next phase.
The
Yep.
Kerrville High School football coach says you have to earn it every day. And I just heard you say that, Carl.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Very
Vince, I'm
cool.
going to pitch it back to you to answer that question and take us
And
home.
all right, thanks, Tom. And first off, I appreciate Tom. konaAI had a great opportunity to sponsor this book, so we thank you for that. And it was almost like my mantra was in that forward introduction, because I think given the times, it's absolutely critical that we're demonstrating value to the business. By design, as we think about chatbots and what they mean, not only for unstructured data, but for structured data. And no one's calling it an LTM or a large transaction model mixed with a large language model, but that's our future. You'll hear it here first. I'm really excited. So konaAI, for example, just recently teamed with a company by the name of Covisint, who's investing tens of millions of dollars into konaAI. We are very excited, and you'll be hearing this in a press release soon. But they are a Gentic AI company that is focused on helping us build these large language models, taking both structured and unstructured data together to make the user interface, Hemma, as you described, easy and seamless, and not just predictive. And we didn't really get into this on that much, but with LLMs, specifically in the company domain, we can even get to prescriptive. So here's the risk that we see. And by the way, a peer company had this issue, 5 years ago, and here's what they did. Here are some things that you might want to consider. Now, it takes a lot of training, and it takes these bot building is not cheap, and it takes investment, but we are doing that investment, and we are so excited to work with companies to hear their problems. I want to hear your challenges. What bots do you want to create? Our window is open. We want to hear your business challenges in compliance, because there's so much we can do with both agentic AI, predictive modeling, and just good old machine learning to really tackle some of these challenges. So it is, Carl, as you said, it's like a first day at work. It's an exciting time. The regulatory environment, whatever it is, you can't measure, your values don't change. So keep up the good fight. Tom, back to you. Thanks everybody for your time on this. And I think we can probably close it out.
Thanks, everyone. And if you'd like any more information, check out www.konai.com. You can check out my book on Amazon.com, Upping Your Game by Tom Fox. Thanks so much, Vince.
Yep, thank you. And everybody, you'll get a copy of this recording as well if you want to please share it with your colleagues and peers. Thank you very much, all. Goodbye.